Chapter 116 PL, please, we plead you to wait, Rapizdano. Is your honor suggesting that you will shelter these people? Absolutely not. That must not happen. We plead that these people's sentences be left to Draupnir. After I heard the elf Niisan and the cat Beastkin raise their voices at the same time, I turned to look towards them. What were their names again? I feel like I've heard them say it, but I've kind of forgotten them. That's right, if I recall correctly, their names are Cruz and Kinko. I just confirmed it. Observation Eyes was able to see it if there was an A.S. signed name, therefore, it was actually quite a convenient skill. Although, in the case where the individual had more than 2 names and I was aware of all of them, the one that I recognized them as would be the one that would be displayed, thus what was displayed was not necessarily perfect. For example, Dina fit into this category. Although she was called Dina, she also had the name known as Venus. However, even if I were to use observation eyes on her, the only name that would be displayed would be Dina. That was likely to be the case because I previously recognized her name to be Dina. Anyways, none of that is relevant right now. Leave everything to Draupnir, huh? What you're saying is you want me to allow you to execute all of these people who had lost the will to fight without a second opinion. How dark. Would you not be satisfied unless you ma.s.sacre them? I'm not pleading purely based on what I want. Since they were the one who had mounted the attack first, we require evidence to show that they had, in fact, been subjugated. After being attacked, if we did not retaliate at all, Draupnir as a kingdom would be looked down upon. Even A.S. Summing we let them go or they got away, things won't just end there. Without a doubt, an army would be dispatched to go out and find the demi-humans. I looked down at the cat Beastkin, right into his circular eyes as he was looking up. I felt that what he had said did make some sense. But above and beyond that, I want to scratch around his chin. No, well. I understand that they're trying to have a serious conversation, but just look at it. It's a cat that's standing up and walking around on 2 feet. I think you'll get it if you're a cat lover, but, you know, my hand is just tingling. I just really want to pet its fluff. I get what you're trying to say. So you are saying that you're not actually trying to bring the law into your own hands. That is exactly so. What about the others? Is there anyone that just really wants to kill the demi-humans? I turned towards the young boy SEI and the others and asked that question. Nevertheless, no one answered in the affirmative. The only exception to this was Scorpius, who stood up in response, but I was not asking her. Sit back down. Why is it that you're so bloodthirsty? In that case, you just need the fact that these people were ma.s. sacred, right? Well. I suppose. Then there's no problem. I've already thought through that much. Dina. What Kinko said made sense. Since they had suffered an event that was pretty close to a declaration of war, if they were to do nothing about it, it would be a problem for the prestige of the kingdom. Furthermore, its citizens would not be able to live peacefully. After all, putting things in Earth terms, it was no different from a wars.h.I+p being shot with something like a missile, which was essentially no different from a declaration of war, yet the country decided to do nothing about it and forgive the offender. Although, if it was J.A.Pan, they might regrettably do just that and let everything slide. Anyways, whatever. The problem is that it's not going to stop at just Draupnir. By now, the other kingdoms would probably be preparing for war too. The particularly scary one is Mjolnir. There's a possibility of them invading now that they might have found out Leon's out of commission. Then I guess, the easiest way is to just make it so that all of the demi-humans are dead. Therefore, I decided to order Dina to first teleport away all of the villages. Understood. X-Gate. Dina opened her arms wide and teleported the whole forest somewhere. The reason that I did not specify the destination was simple. It was because Dina knew about the geography of this world more than I did. I only knew about the locations we had visited thus far. However, Dina knew about quite a lot of different places. As such, leaving it up to her discretion was less likely to result in the villages being sent to some weird location. After the forest was swallowed by a crack in S.P.A.C.E time, the demi-humans who could not comprehend what was happening were left behind. After all, from their point of view, they must have been sick and tired of everything after they were suddenly caught up in a monster war and the disappearance of the forest, even though they had just been living as usual. Next. The 4 demi-humans there and Sagittarius. I'm sorry, but go and explain what's going on to the rest of the demi-humans. I snapped my fingers and undid the restraints on the demi-humans. I heard Jean saying to evacuate, but there weren't really any problems in releasing their restraints. Although it sounded bad, even if they were to decide to do something, they were not in a position where they were able to do anything to us. Even if they decided to target the likes of Virgo or SEI, who were the weaker members amongst us, I would be able to step in before anything happened. If they wanted to be able to outspeed me, they would have to at least have the ability to operate in the millisecond world. As long as they lived in the world where time flowed as normal, whatever they decided to do, it was impossible for them to take the initiative away from those like me, Bennett Nash, or the Demon King, who lived in a world where our perception of time was a few stages beyond them. Having said that, it was all unwarranted anxiety. Under the current circumstances, the demi-humans had already sensed that it was the only option they could choose and decided to start explaining the situation to the others. I did seem to occasionally hear, "Definitely don't try to defy, you saw those monsters fighting each other, right? And if you don't want to die, just stay quiet," whilst feeling their fear being directed towards us. I supposed it must have really been a huge shock for them to have witnessed the monster battle between the 12 heavenly stars. Eventually, the demi-humans must have accepted the situation as they started to slowly trickle away from the location, only to leave the wilderness behind with no one remaining. Now, once I just add my finest.h.I plus ng touches, we will be able to create a situation where it's persuasive to say that the demi-humans were annihilated. Now then, you guys, step back. After I got everyone to stand behind me, I slowly raised one of my arms up into the air. When I did, Mana gathered on my palm and gave birth to a giant fireball. On the surface, it might have seemed like a fire attribute spell. However, my elemental affinity was sun attribute. As such, it was a fire, yet not a fire. It was the power of the sun. As the bright white fireball accelerated, it increased in size and dispersed an extraordinary amount of violent and hot wind. If the skill were to be left alone, even before it was fired, the mere collateral damage from the hot wind would be enough to annihilate all the demi-humans 1,000 times over and still have plenty of charge, left over. However, I was able to prevent any collateral damage by encapsulating the fireball with a barrier at the same time as the activation of the arcane magic. Solar Flare 2, a high-tier sun attribute arcane magic, Solar Flare. Also known as Solar Surface Explosion. 3. Of course, it was not the real thing. It was said that a real solar flare would have a length of tens of thousands of kilometers and its destructive power would exceed over 100 million hydrogen bombs, but unfortunately, this was nothing more than an imitation created by Mana in the end. Unfortunately, imitation could not reach such an extent. So the skill's only as big as a few hundred meters wide, and I estimate its destructive power would probably only be as much as about tens to a few hundred hydrogen bombs worth. My perception is also reaching a pretty dangerous point, huh? Just then, I felt my gut sink after thinking about the way I thought about things. To think about the destructive power of a few hundred hydrogen bombs as only as much, I've reached quite a dangerous point. Honestly, I can already see my common sense starting to collapse. Before I fired the skill, just as a precaution, I activated a divine magic barrier and enveloped everyone present within it. Furthermore, I plastered divine power around the target area, which would soon be scorched, and let the power spin rapidly. It was one of the high-tier sun attribute divine magic spells, Heliosphere. For it was a technique which created an absolute field against arcane magic by rapidly spinning divine power and creating a layer, thereby stopping any form of mana from passing through it. If I was still in the game, I would have been able to fire the skill without thinking twice. Unfortunately, if I were to fire a solar flare skill without any preparation in this world, however much I held back in consideration for my surroundings, the collateral damage would not be a laughing matter. After finest.h.I plus ng my preparations, I lightly flicked my wrist. In unison with my movement, the fireball which was on top of me fired, landing on the location where the demi-human villages used to be. Immediately afterwards, a giant explosion. The first thing that happened was a flash. There was a light that quite literally blinded and burned the entire field of vision, painting the environment white. Normally, anyone who saw this would no doubt be blinded without exception. Nevertheless, because the skill I previously cast had a debuff immunity effect, the actual amount of light that reached people's eyes was no different from accidentally staring at the sun directly. Therefore, as long as they closed their eyes reflexively, there would be no problem. For reference, I didn't even close my eyes. Isn't this body really a cheat? I'm quite surprised that even my IB.A.L.L.S endurance is blown out of proportion. Next, the explosion went off, creating a mushroom cloud. 5. Even though I'm the one who fired it, this is quite funny. For an individual to be able to present a nuclear tier level of power, what the H.E.L.L is this? But can you believe it? Even this is nothing but a backyard toy sparkler compared to the destructive power of the maiden who fires the silver arrow. I mean, her arrow really shatters planets. I don't even want to think about how many times stronger than nuclear warheads it is. 6. Somehow, I can understand why people in the past feared and wanted to get rid of me. It feels quite natural. Yeah, this is quite scary. Maybe on the day the Demon King and I fire arcane magic at each other, that alone would turn the whole of Midgard into a scorched wasteland? When I turned to look behind me, there were 3 types of responses. Every one of the 12 heavenly stars was looking at me with an expression that said, as expected, with the exception of Virgo, who looked like her soul had escaped her body. Similarly, the heroes group had the same reaction as Virgo, and the whites of their eyes were showing. Oh, now that I look at it, only the tiger dashed away. Hey Sergeant, were we trying to fight against this? Yeah. That's right. To follow Leon-sama probably would have meant something like that. However you look at it, we probably would have just died from the shockwave alone. We were too reckless. I don't even want to see another fight anymore. The 4 commissioned officers were muttering something to each other quietly and were showing an expression as if they had no other option but to laugh. Eventually, the explosion settled back down, leaving behind a giant crater and a burnt field. Well, even though I said a burnt field, since it was just a barren wasteland to begin with, there are only things like rocks and stuff left though. In any event, with this, a place which would serve as the basis for the excuse was perfected. Looking at the place, anybody would think that I had burnt the demi-humans along with their villages. In all likelihood, that explosion just now would have been seen by the other kingdoms anyway. All that remained was for the demi-humans to relocate and everything would be over. Now then, you were called Kainko, right? It's not like I can't understand your feelings, but this time, why don't you let the demi-humans go as a favor for me? I hope you can tell your kingdom that the demi-humans were annihilated from that attack. Yes. Will happily oblige. What is this? You're suddenly quite cooperative. Yes. Will happily oblige. Whatever. Then, I'll leave it to you. The elf over there too, all right. Yes. Will happily oblige. Isu, Mamu. 7, TLN, yes, ma'am. I was thinking that there would still be some kind of objection from Kainko and Cruz, but contrary to my predictions, they became quite docile and cooperative. But really, are these two all right? Their faces are quite pale and their feet are shaking quite violently. I mean, even if they're not that terrified, it's not like I'm going to attack them or anything. If anything, I actually quite like feline animals, so I'm thinking that I want to get along with them. As I thought that, I looked towards Kainko, but he suddenly screamed high with a voice that sounded like he was on the verge of tears. This is quite a shock. Next is the matter about the demi-humans. Rupa-sama, please allow me to assume that role. The next role was something important. It was the role to take the demi-humans to the Maffel Tower. However, if they were to be accidentally seen by the humanoids, all of the preparations done up until this point would become meaningless. Therefore, I was originally thinking that I should assign this role to Libra, who was the most sensitive to the surroundings and would be able to ascertain the best possible route in this situation. Nevertheless, Sagittarius volunteered as a tribute himself. You will. I see. Master, the most suitable person in this situation is indeed Sagittarius. Is that so? Well, if you say so, then there shouldn't be any mistakes. Sagittarius, huh? Well, I suppose he does seem to have quite good eyesight, so I would think that he would be right after Libra in terms of suitability. But when compared to Libra, there seem to be some worrisome aspects. My worries must have been showing on my face. Sagittarius for some reason took out his bow and arrow as if it was the most natural thing to do. Please observe, Rapasama. My arrow can be used in this way too. Everyone. Grab each other's hand. The one at the foremost, grab onto me. What exactly is he trying to do? The demi-humans listened to Sagittarius's command and joined hands with one another. Then, the demi-human who was at the head of the line held on to Sagittarius. It seemed they were trying to do something quite weird. However, I did not understand the meaning of all of this. Are they thinking that they should all line up and head to the tower together in a friendly and orderly manner? However you think about it, that's very conspicuous. Then we will be going now. Al-Nassel. Sagittarius fired his arrow and for some reason grabbed the arrow right after it was released. What exactly was he thinking? However, I immediately understood the reason for his actions. Sagittarius, who grabbed the arrow, disappeared from the spot and all the demi-humans who were in contact with him disappeared together. Are you surprised, Master? Why, yeah. Just then, what did he just do? That was his Al-Nassel skill, which boasts absolute accuracy. The moment after the arrow is fired, he teleports to and in front of the enemy. Of course, even Master must be aware of that already, but he acquired the ability to teleport along with the fired arrow by grabbing the arrow itself. We were also helped as a result of that skill. Rather than an absolute hit skill, wouldn't it become an absolute evasion skill? I suppose it can be used in both ways. I was impressed by Sagittarius's use of the skill as it was explained by Libra. By grabbing onto the arrow with an absolute accuracy effect which bypassed said the concept of S.P.A.ce time, Sagittarius was able to use it as a teleportation skill, an absolute evasion skill and a mode of moving things. What is this? Isn't that just unfair? I mean, in other words, as long as he felt like it, he was able to go anywhere he wanted. Such a cheat skill really existed. Chapter 117, A line of sight looked down from the distant sky above. She sighed in melancholy as she watched the battle within her miniature garden. It just wasn't working out that well. A mistake from the distant past had not been corrected and was now being revived after generations, upsetting the balance of the world. And that bug was Rapasmaffle. The second mistake was her return after having been successfully eliminated previously. She had wanted to seal away Rappa's consciousness and ego in order to turn Rappa's into an existence that moved in a way favorable to her will and maintained the balance of the world. After all, it was foreseeable that even if Rappa's was left alone, she would have revived by herself eventually anyway. Furthermore, there was no P.A.W.N that could stop her. In that case, she might as well revive her and move her accordingly, but it seemed to have been a bad move. In the end, a bug was still a bug. It wasn't something that could be resolved with a superficial fix. She had hoped that Rappa's would eliminate the Demon King who had recently stopped listening to her commands completely, and was intending to turn her into the evil of the world. However, by the time she had noticed it, Rappa's had already become the evil to her. How ironic. What went wrong? Was the time chosen for Rappa's revival wrong? Was the tentative personality given to her wrong? Or, whatever it was, she must admit it. She had made a mistake. Rapasmaffle was now searching to find her own way out of the original plans. Once the script had been messed up, the more one tried to fix it, the weirder it would become. And the presence of Rapasmaffle would only exacerbate the problems. This was unacceptable. People would not be able to find happiness this way. In order for people to be happy, a certain degree of misfortune was necessary. The greater the fall, the greater the happiness they would feel in the end. However, Ruppes was a bug that completely destroyed misfortune itself. In a world with only happiness, people would not feel happy. They could not be happy. Therefore, yes, a certain amount of despair and misfortune was necessary for her beloved children as long as it was not overwhelmingly destructive. So she made the decision to move her strongest piece in the current situation. It was a rough treatment, but it couldn't be helped. She would eliminate Ruppes with an infinite army. There was no other way. Leo, after sending the centaurs and the other demi-humans to the tower, Sagittarius returned safely. Only the Spiderkin remained, as he probably had something to say to the youth SEI. It seemed most of the problems had been cleared up, but there was still one thing left to do. I left Ares and the rest behind and went towards Leon, who was still lying on the ground. The giant lion glared at me with murderous intent, but in his exhausted state, he was unable to break the chains binding him and could only struggle futilely. I suppose I'll just say. It's been a while, Leon. Ruppes. There was only hatred for me in Leon's eyes. In a sense, it was rather novel, yet it was only natural. As I had only encountered friendly people until now, it felt rather funny. I smiled at Leon, who was desperately staring angrily at me, and decided to check his status by activating Observing Eye. The Lion King, Leon level, 1000 race, Nemean Lion attribute, Sun HP, 1/1,500,000 SP, 8,250/10,000 STR, Strength? Dex, Dexterity? VIT, Vitality? Int, Intelligence? AGI, Agility? MND, Mind? Well, it was as expected. Since he had not returned to me, his status was not displayed except for his HP, SP, and level. His name was Lion King, Leon instead of 12-star, Leon, so he was still in a state of rebellion. However, his HP, hey, this could be said to be a truly appropriate number. Furthermore, the G.O.dis modification would have been added on top of this, so I knew he would be dangerously strong even without fighting him. Ares and the rest did well to win the fight. If I were to fight him normally, it would have been quite difficult. It was one of his features to not have any outstanding skills like the other 12 stars, but conversely, it could be said that he did not need such petty tricks. His strength lay in overpowering the enemy with his status. He would crush an opponent up front without any petty tricks. No matter how good one's skills were or how much magic one could use, it was all pointless if the difference in power was too great. A level 100 character could give it his all to make a full-powered attack, but a high-level character could still easily surpass it with just a normal attack. This was the nature of RPGs. Well, there were also those in the world who limited their playthroughs with low levels or did amazing things like subjugating the Demon King with only low levels. Therefore, I couldn't say it was always like that. Since I couldn't see his status, I couldn't be sure, but yes, his overall combat power was evidently higher than that of Bennett Nash in her base state. We've finally met. I've never once forgotten about you in the past 200 years. Every night, I was reminded of the humiliation I felt on that day. I'm going to kill and eat you. Now, unravel this chain. Fight me. While listening to his words, I considered what would be the best way to deal with this. The best solution, well, it would be to fight him like he said. I should just defeat him here to establish the power relations. H.I+P and forcefully return him back to my control. This would weaken the fool back to level 800. Yes, this was the best solution. The answer was simple without having to worry about it. However, the Ruppes inside me had a different answer, and I eventually also arrived at the same answer. And that was I refuse. Wah! The battle is already over. Ares and the rest have won. That's all. If I just casually act now, it would taint their victory. Yes, the battle was between Leon and Ares and the rest. It was already over. I just casually came over after the fight was finished. I had no interest in restarting a fight that was already over. Furthermore, it would be too disrespectful towards Ares and the rest who worked hard to achieve this victory after overcoming the Ma.S.Civ difference in their statuses. Ares and the rest had won with great effort. If I overturned their victory to restart the fight and beat Leon, it would be like saying I alone could beat him. This would be inappropriate no matter how one looked at it. Besides, Ares and the rest were my subordinates, so their victory would be my victory too. I wanted to be proud of it right now. I would not drag it through the mud. Don't joke around. You're leaving it all to your subordinates and just being a spectator yourself? Am I not worthy of fighting you? I've heard that you relied on the G.O.Dis power. Tisk. My statement silenced Leon, who was making a ruckus. He was cornered by people who were weaker than himself, yet he still lost after borrowing the G.O.Dis power. This was a great humiliation for him, something he would rather forget. But I wouldn't let him forget it. If he were to be left alone like this, he would surely be manipulated by the G.O.Dis again. I'm not saying that it's bad to ask for power. It's fine to use everything that you can use. In that sense, the power of the G.O.Dis was no exception. However, you became unsightly after being taken over by the power. If you had been able to make use of the power and make it your own, I might even have praised you for a job well done. After all, I was someone who suddenly gained the peerless power of a game character. In that sense, I was just like him. Since this was how I gained my power, I wouldn't criticize his method of gaining power. That would just be an oversized boomerang that would return to strike me. However, while being controlled, the person fighting the battle would no longer be you. Even if I fight you now, it would really be a fight between me and the G.O.Dis. You would just be a chess piece moved by the G.O.Dis, an item that was being used by her. That was exactly why Bennett Nash appeared so dazzling when she flatly rejected the G.O.Dis. She carried out her own will, pus.h.I plus ng the G.O.Dis away as if she was in the way. Because she was like that, she was acknowledged by Ruppes as a rival. I'll answer your previous question. In the moment I said those words, I could no longer recognize who was actually speaking. I understood that I was speaking by my own will, but at the same time, I felt like someone else was also speaking through my mouth, using the same words and the same intentions. For the first time, I felt that Ruppes and I had completely overlapped. The current you is not worthy of fighting me. After saying that, I moved to turn my back to Leon. I might have said a bit too much, but if I didn't do so, he would have easily relied on the G.O.Dis power again. Leon was a simple-minded fool, but that fool could still be used as a weapon at times. This current statement established to him that if he were to use the G.O.Dis power, he would be unworthy of fighting me. In that case, he would not use the G.O.Dis power anymore. Since his biggest goal was me, he wouldn't choose a route that would bring him further away from his goal. In a sense, he was easy to understand and somewhat cute. If I had to relate it to something, it was like the cuteness of a silly cat or dog. Certainly, Leon was an annoying guy, but it wasn't a big problem for me. I wondered what I could compare him to. If I had to forcefully do a comparison, yes, it would be like a cat. A cat might jump onto a personal computer because it wanted some attention. It would then step on the keyboard, possibly pressing AB.U.T.ton that forcefully shut down the entire system. It couldn't be helped, so the owner played with it, but it soon lost interest and walked away after scratching the owner's hand. It would be annoying and selfish, such that the owner might think of it as a little bastard. But even then, the owner would think of it as cute and forgive it anyway. For me, Leon was something like that. At least, he was not a piece of garbage like the Dragon King that I once fought was. Although he was indeed self-indulgent and arrogant, it was merely like a wild lion killing and eating a zebra. It was nothing more than that. Who's this Dragon King again? Gemini https://handofvecna.blogspot.com. The location was a forest. The glow of mana illuminated the trees. In place of plants that couldn't move by themselves, the divine life forms created by divine power, the spirits innocently flew among the trees. Among these spirits, there were those who awakened their own sense of self and became fully independent from the plants. These were called fairies. Occasionally, they were revered by humanoids and other creatures as divine. Furthermore, there were also humanoids that were influenced by the fairies. These were the fairy race, elves. Therefore, they had a high compatibility with divine power even though they were mutated by mana. A young man walked alone in the forest. This man in pure white armor had authority and power that were second only to the Demon King among the demon race. He was Terra, known as the son of the Demon King. He was walking towards the deepest part of the forest with a dignified stride. The spirits and fairies watched him with great interest, sometimes even flying around him mischievously. Terra smiled at him without raising his hand to drive them away. The appearances of spirits and fairies could vary widely, but they were generally cute boys and girls about 20% the size of humans. Nonetheless, this was not absolute. Some powerful fairies were indistinguishable from humans. There was even a pirate-style man with an unnecessarily strong body. Eventually, Terra reached the deepest part of the forest and saw a girl standing there as if she knew that he would be coming. She had semi-long, warm honey-colored hair that reached down to her shoulders. A headband was worn on her head and her eyes were green. She wore a three-colored dress, consisting of red, blue, and white. An armored heroic spirit, Einherjar, had taken on a temporary body to serve next to her. Such an unusual guest, but I can't welcome you. The fairy princess Pollux, who was at the top of all fairies, sat in the deepest part of the fairies' home, Alfheimr. As the top of the life forms created by divine power, she was the polar opposite of the Demon King. If the Demon King and the demons symbolized darkness in Midgard, Pollux and the fairies symbolized light in Midgard. Although the two of them could not possibly mix with each other, they never actually clashed, keeping a state of pas.civ opposition for many years. It was as if they were secretly in contact with each other to maintain the balance of light and darkness, preventing either light or darkness from sweeping away the world. Greetings, Great Elder of Light. My name is Terra. First of all, please forgive my sudden, impolite visit. If I recall correctly, you're that, right? The Demon King's son. I've heard that ORM had a son, but I imagined the son to be simply a smaller version of him. It seems you're rather polite. Pollux watched and observed Terra. There was no sense of hostility. His sword was sheathed and respect was evident in his eyes. However, he was a demon, so unfortunately, he wasn't a reliable person. So why did you come here? If it's not an important matter, please go home. I want you to give me detailed information about Avatar and, if possible, teach me how to make one. Hearing Terra's words, Pollux narrowed her eyes coldly. Avatar, it could be said to be the birth of a spirit or fairy. After all, they were basically temporary bodies, avatars, of plants. Although there was a difference between divine power and arcane power, they were still similar to the demons who were created from mana. In an extreme sense, spirits and fairies were divine magic used by plants. Plants could not move by themselves, so they would generally evolve in two ways. One way was mutation. They could mutate into monsters, which included the demi-humans known as dryads. The other way was to create an avatar, giving rise to spirits and fairies. However, it was said that the essential method of creating an avatar was known only to three individuals in this world: the G.O.Dis, the Demon King, and the Fairy Princess. Plants require Pollux's permission to create avatars. They could not be created do so without her A.S.Sistance. The question remained how her all-important self was created, but N.O. Body could answer that. This was because even if someone were to return to the time before the humanoids were created, Pollux had already existed back then. What would you do after knowing that? I want to free someone from the fate of the demon race. Her friend sacrificed himself for this purpose. We are not the G.O.Dis dolls. We want to take our lives into our own hands. I see. For a moment, there was gentleness in Pollux's eyes as she looked at Terra. At the same time, her eyes were dyed with sympathy as if she was looking at a pitiful thing. But that lasted only for a moment. In the next moment, she became cold as ice. Sorry, but it is a secret. I can't teach you despite whatever reason you may have. I know, but I cannot give up regardless of the reasons. I swore to my friend who died that I'd definitely do it. Then what would you do? What do I need to do to be acknowledged? Well, the fairy princess waved her hand. At the same time, more than 100 heroic spirits appeared and stood before Terra. All of them were over level 700. Of course, there were also level 1000 characters mixed in among them. Dance, my beloved children. Return of the heroic spirits, Argonautai. The guardians of the sanctuary from various generations appeared. Whenever Midgard was shrouded in darkness, heroes would descend to disperse the dark clouds. The first Flugels, from a time before the consumption of the forbidden fruit, descended like an army of angels. There was Eir, the Valkyrie who blessed the poor with her fruits. Brunhild, who led the N.O.Bli warriors to the G.O.Dis, was present as well. The great people from history revived one after another, creating a ridiculous difference in combat power when compared to Terra. If you win, I can give you a hint. But basically, I just don't feel like teaching you anything. As she said this, the fairy princess showed an icy expression that was full of ridicule. Chapter 118 The G.O.D-like skill used by Pollux, Argonautai, summoned the spirits of dead heroes from the past and gave them physical bodies to materialize in. Their races did not matter. She could revive even magical beasts as long as she acknowledged them as heroes and they shared her will. There were humans, vampires, flugels, elves, dwarves, floresiensis, and beastkin. There were also buggen, merfolk, plantkin, snackakin, and even the long-extinct giants and dragonkeen. All of them raised their weapons to protect her. There was no limit to how many people she could summon and they lasted as long as Pollux's SP wasn't depleted. Furthermore, Pollux had another special ability. She could draw an unlimited amount of arcane power and divine power from the world of Midgard itself via her dormant true form. And this was the proof that her true form that created her avatar had unlimited power, but what exactly was her true form? Only a few people could arrive at the answer. Please hurt him a little, so that he'd never want to come here again. At Pollux's command, all of the heroes rushed forward at once. Terra drew his sword and attacked one of the leading heroes. However, the giant in the front line easily parried Terra's slash with the great sword in his hand and pushed him back. Then, two Flugel knights cut in from the sky, leaving two shallow wounds on the shoulders of Terra, who barely evaded the attacks. Ugh. Heh, you have good reaction speed. Pollux praised him as if she was impressed by Terra's speed at which he avoided a fatal wound. However, there was not the slightest hint of vigilance against Terra in her voice. It was merely the praise of someone who was absolutely certain of her victory as she watched the desperate efforts of her opponent. Of course, there was no way she could lose. She would win even if she took a nap. It was like a game of chess in which the opponent had only a king, while she had so many queens and knights that it broke the rules. If the king was completely surrounded by her queens and knights, why would there be any need for vigilance? Furthermore, there were several heroes here who were even stronger than Terra. If this situation was to be overcome, it would need an absurd king who could overturn the entire chessboard. In the past, Pollux had met one such individual who was ridiculous enough to make her admit defeat the Black-Winged Overlord. However, unfortunately, she was in a completely different league from Terra. It was checkmate. The fight was over before it even began. Just give up and go home. I don't have a hobby of bullying the weak. Isn't it too early to proclaim victory? Is it? Well then, continue with your pointless resistance. The giant stepped forward and sent Terra flying with a club. Terra certainly raised his defense in time, but it was overpowered by the opponent's absurd strength and level. There were various kinds of beastkin waiting where he landed and they attacked together at once. Terra barely managed to evade their attacks, but he couldn't find an opening to counterattack. As a result, he was unilaterally increasing his own injuries. He somehow widened the distance and swung his sword, sending forth a blue slash. However, it wasn't able to even defeat one enemy as it was blocked by multiple S.H.I plus elds. Moreover, magic of all attributes were fired at him in return. Even after resisting some of them, the rest still struck him. Ugh. The teamwork of the Argonauts was by no means good. Or rather, it was bad to the extent of having no leaders. H.I+P. Each individual just rushed in to attack Terra in a bid for a grandstand play. This was the reason why Terra had not lost yet. If Castor had been here, it would be possible to unite the heroes as one and operate as a single army. However, Pollux couldn't do that. Since she had no combat power, she couldn't stand in the battlefield herself. Even if she had the cheat-like ability to produce an unlimited amount of military power, she could only summon them forth. She simply didn't have a way to make good use of them. In other words, she couldn't master her own skill. In fact, this Ma.S.S summoning merely resulted in the heroes dragging each other down, significantly lowering their individual combat power. Sometimes, they even got in the way of each other. However, this did not imply that there would be a chance for victory. Even if it was a poorly coordinated group, their individual power was still unmistakably of the highest tier in Midgard. When one could not even be certain of victory in a 1-versus-1 fight, they became an incredible threat when they were gathered together as a group. Even if one or two of them could be defeated, Pollux could immediately revive them by summoning them again. Thus, the number of enemies would never decrease unless Pollux was defeated, but there were too many enemies in the way to get close to her. Furthermore, that wasn't all of the cheats her skill was capable of. No, let's push you a bit further. Heroes, sacrifice your lives to become the cornerstone of victory. Some of those with the hero CLA.S.S responded to Pollux's order. They were not recent heroes from the past 200 years. They were probably heroes from thousands or tens of thousands years ago. They received Pollux's orders and rushed to be the first to sacrifice their lives. Skill, Soul Succession. This was one of the skills possessed by the hero. It was a skill that would create a permanent barrier, weakening enemies and strengthening allies. However, in proportion to its powerful effects, the price was high, requiring the life of the person who used the skill. The heroes activated the skill without hesitation and dispersed into particles of light. At the same time, all of the Argonauts were strengthened by several tiers, while Terra's status was reduced to about level 200. But the nightmare was not over yet. Souls of the dead, return to me. Dance, my beloved children. Pollux used Argonautai again. Then, the heroes, who had just sacrificed their lives, returned to the battlefield as if nothing had happened. This was the most unreasonable aspect of Argonautai Infinite Resurrection. Even the major demerit of having to sacrifice one's life was not a problem as long as the skill user was a heroic spirit, Einherjar. Since they were already dead, they could be revived as many times as necessary so long as Pollux existed. As a result of multiple uses of the powerful soul succession skill, the status of the heroes had far exceeded what an ordinary level 1000 would have. In terms of ability values, everyone had risen to the tier of the 7 heroes. On the other hand, Terra was rapidly weakened as his combat power was reduced to be even lower than that of the 7 luminaries. In other words, it was not an exaggeration to say that this was like hundreds of Alioth fighting against Mars on his own. It could not even be considered a proper battle. Now then, even a kid would understand that further combat is pointless. Are you still going to continue? Of course. I'm not giving up. How foolish. This is not courage. It's just being suicidal. The heroes began to attack fiercely once more. At this point, it was just an execution, a scenario where the heroes were pulling back just enough to not kill him. He was beaten, kicked, and knocked down to the ground in an unsightly manner. He was stepped upon and thrown about. It was clear to anyone watching which side was winning. Seeing this situation, Pollux raised her eyebrow in annoyance. Stop fooling around. How long are you going to continue with this pointless struggle? Who knows? When will it be? Terra acted like he still had breathing room, but of course, such leeway did not exist. Even as he acted tough, he was punched in the face while someone told him to shut up. This was not a fight anymore. It was just lynching. Pollux frowned upon seeing this pitiful unilateral development. Honestly, this was hard to do. If Terra had spoken arrogantly like most demons would have, he would have been easily seen as a villain and crushed without hesitation. If he was like Leon, she would have eliminated him with full power. On the other hand, if the opponent was like Bennett Nash, Pollux would be eliminated if she didn't use her full power. However, after talking to Terra, she understood that he was not a villain. Furthermore, he was fighting for someone he loved. This was really hard to do. Pollux was fond of wishes and beliefs that were pure and n.o.bly. She wanted to support him, instead of stepping on him. She did not have a hobby of Cruce.H.I plus ng, a healthy flower that was desperately trying to bloom in this H.E.L.L-like world. If it was a poisonous flower that spread poison without consideration of its environment, she would pluck it without hesitation. However, that was impossible in this case. She really could not bring herself to do it. I really hate this. Moreover, since he is unnecessarily resistant to abnormal statuses, I can't just put him to sleep. Pollux closed her eyes gloomily and sighed. She turned and left the battlefield. If you have the skill Blunt Edge Strike, please continue hitting him until he loses consciousness. The rest of you are to be on standby. I don't want the Demon King to bear a grudge against me, so be sure not to kill him. She moved away from the armored warrior who served as her escort and approached the shade of another tree. She couldn't bear to watch anymore. She didn't think it was interesting to lynch a young man who was fighting for someone he loved and had such a straightforward belief. However, she was too careless. As if waiting for this moment, someone jumped off the tree, landed behind Pollux, and raised a knife to her neck. Heroic spirits. Stop attacking. After assaulting and holding Pollux hostage, Luna ordered the heroic spirits to stop attacking. Her voice appeared calm, but Pollux noticed that the blade at her neck was shaking. She turned to look at the young man who was restraining her. No, it was a girl. Tears appeared in Luna's eyes, which were mixed with fear and anger. She was full of lamentation over her inability to do anything while Terra was being beaten. Pollux understood with just a glance. Oh, I see. She's the one that Terra wants to protect. Hey, were you waiting for the moment when I left my escort? How brave. So you managed to get behind me, but do you think you can win? Apparently, you are about level 300, but I'm still level 800 though, you know. If you have the combat power of a regular level 800, I can't possibly win. But you should have little combat power in exchange for your powerful, peerless skill. Am I wrong? Not a bad take at the situation. Is this your idea? Or is it the idea of that child over there? Anyway, your guess is off. You will die if I counterattack now. Pollux laughed, showing leisure that only the powerful would have. Although Luna's hand trembled for a moment, there was no further agitation. This is Terra-sama's idea. And I believe in him. Heh, so what if I refuse to cooperate? That child's objective cannot be achieved without me, so I know from the start that I don't have to worry about being killed. I can just act stubbornly, you know. At that time, I will kill you at my own discretion. I can't allow Terra-sama to be killed. Pollux glanced at Luna and Terra and smiled at the strength of their bond. At the same time, she thought, such pitiful children. If they hadn't been born as demons, they wouldn't have to suffer so much. Anyway, victory had been determined in this battle. Pollux raised both of her hands to express her willingness to surrender. Okay, I surrender. As you have guessed, my combat power is inferior even to adventurers. I will stop the Argonauts. Please apply recovery skills on him. The young man's persistence and strategy has won, huh? As she thought this, Pollux was strangely happy. If such people existed, the demons might not be hopeless after all. That was how she felt. She could see a bit of light for the future. https://handofvecna.blogspot.com Image from Light Novel Volume 6 Author's Notes Argonauti. This is the basic and most powerful skill of Pollux. Its effect is the Ma.S.S summoning of the spirits of heroes from the past. Even the braves and heroes from recorded history could be summoned. Although each summoning has the inefficient cost of 1000 SP, Pollux can easily summon several hundreds of people without any problem. The strength of the hero makes no difference to its SP cost. The cost would be the same whether the hero was level 10 or level 1000. The summoned hero will not hesitate to use sacrificial or self-destructive tactics, since they can cheat by reviving immediately. Just think of it as everyone being able to resurrect in the next moment after getting serious. The hero's combat powers are as if they were at the prime of their lives, therefore it is difficult to deal with. Furthermore, Pollux can receive arcane power and divine power from Midgard via her true body, so her SP is practically infinite and she can summon and revive them indefinitely. However, this skill can only summon those whom Pollux recognized unmistakably as heroes, therefore the 7 heroes cannot be summoned. Pollux considers them to be traitors, not heroes. Its weakness is that they would disappear upon Pollux's defeat. And the most crucial point is that Pollux is extremely weak. Pollux was aware of this weakness, therefore she thought that the best method was to simply summon them and leave the entire army to Castor, while she remained behind in Alfheim. Pollux of the twins Pollux is simultaneously the strongest and weakest of the tyrannical 12 stars. She has the most common sense among them. Unlike the others, she doesn't have any weird kinks and she isn't a weirdo. In fact, she is actually a decent person. As a result, she has the most difficult time among the 12 stars, since her master, who threw her common sense away into the other side of the universe with all her might, regularly gives her headaches. As the symbol of light in Midgard, she is the leader of the fairies and spirits, who are the opposite of the demons. As the counterpart of the Demon King, she maintains the balance between good and evil as well as light and darkness in the world. Needless to say, she was originally on the G.O.Dis side, so she is somewhat similar to Parthinos. She is undoubtedly the biggest cheat among the 12 stars and also the biggest burden among them. Her individual combat power is even inferior to Jean's. Her true form is a ridiculously large tree that can encircle the entire world. Although either of the twins can demonstrate considerable combat power individually, their true value lay in the siblings working together. By the way, Pollux and Castor are the oldest of the 12 stars. Her lifetime is longer than the history of the humanoids. She is said to have lived for tens of millions of years. Rupa's party in order of age: Castor, Pollux, Pisces, Aquarius, Leon, Agacaros, Taurus, Carcinos, Rupas, Scorpius, Parthinos, deceased, Sagittarius, Aries, Libra, Virgo, Tanaka, Astrea, Suzuki. Someone seems to have been forgotten. Who could it be? Chapter 119. This was the house of the fairy princess, located in the deepest part of Alfheim. After the battle was over, Terra, Luna, and Pollux faced each other across the table. Pollux ordered her fairy subordinates to brew some black tea and then turned to face Terra and Luna with a serious look. Now then, you wanted to create an avatar, right? To be precise, you desired a body that isn't a demon in order to avoid the fate of demons, I think. Oh, yes. Whether it be fighting Rupa's Moffel or searching for some other way, it seems that right now we don't really have free will of our own. The demon race was bound by fate. He didn't know the details, since the person who knew, Venus, was no longer around. No, even if she was around, she wouldn't have spoken truthfully. The other person who seemed to know was his father, the Demon King, but Terra no longer trusted him. Because if Terra's guess was correct, that man was definitely not a demon. He was more like a sacred existence that stood opposite to the demons. Basically, the Demon King was an actor whose purpose was to enliven the stage prepared by the G.O.Dis. The demons were only dolls created as chess pieces for the Demon King. This wasn't simply a leap of his imagination. They were called counterfeit devils and the G.O.Dis toys by Agacaros. If the demons didn't kill people, they would die. Furthermore, when they died, they would cease to exist and turn into mana. This was what Venus meant by dolls. If the pieces were put together, one would understand even if he didn't want to. The fact was that the demons were arcane magic of the G.O.Dis, which was used to forcibly oppose the humanoids. He didn't know what the thoughts and intentions of the G.O.Dis were when she did such a thing. But there was one thing that he could say for certain. From the beginning, the G.O.Dis never intended for the demons to win. At the milestones of each era, whenever the humanoids were in danger, the G.O.Dis would reach out to save them. Sometimes, she empowered the people who were called heroes to miraculously turn the tide. However, if the truth was known, it would become such a ridiculous and humorous scene. It was the G.O.Dis herself who created the demons to afflict the humanoids, yet she would rescue them from the crisis created by herself as if she was the G.O.Dis of Compa.S.Zion. She was basically playing by a script that she wrote herself. Both enemies and allies were moved by the G.O.Dis. It was just a puppet show. They were only dolls that couldn't help but move according to her scenario. You have noticed this, therefore you begged my father to save Luna. In Terra's mind, he thought of a man who was his subordinate and his friend. He, Mercurius, must have reached this truth before him and thought that only the Demon King could change this fate. Thus, he rushed recklessly into action. In the end, he went to Draupnir like he was being led by the nose, and met his worst possible end in a conflict with the hero and the tyrannical 12 stars. When he found out about his friend's wish, Terra couldn't stay silent anymore. His father, the leader of the demons, wasn't on their side. He wasn't an ally from the start. If things remained the way they were, there was no way for Luna to survive. Now that Rapazmoffel had returned, it would only be a matter of time before the demons were exterminated. The only way to save Luna was to transform her into something other than a demon. Similarly, Luna had also noticed the fate of the demons. She thought that it must be averted, even if it was only for Terra alone. Meanwhile, Terra was unaware of her thoughts. They were so similar to each other. I'll start with the conclusion first. What you desire most right now is the method to move the body of an avatar, but I can't teach it to you. What? To be precise, I don't know it myself. I can certainly create avatars with divine power and can also let them be possessed by the souls of the dead to result in something akin to resurrection. But I have never heard of transforming an arcane magic life form, such as a demon, into a fairy. It's just unprecedented. We are divine magic, while you are arcane magic. As you know, divine magic and arcane magic are opposing powers. Honestly speaking, I've never even considered such a thing. Divine power was the opposite of arcane power and had the property of being able to repel arcane power. For example, S.H.I plus ELDs created by divine magic utilized this property. Furthermore, it could be used to enhance substances other than arcane power. This was also used by healing and strengthening skills. In other words, arcane magic was the power to create what did not exist, while divine magic was the power to enhance what already existed. In the first place, their natures were completely different. We could let you die and then try to revive you with Argonautai, but I don't know if that will work. May I hear the reason? It might be a bit cruel to say this, but it's possible that you may not even have a soul in the first place. Pollux's words caused Luna's shoulders to shudder. We fairies are the avatars of plants, so there are souls in our true bodies. To be precise, a part of the soul is separated from the body to dwell within the avatar. But you demons were created from nothing, right? Yes. For example, there's no soul in an arcane magic like Fireball or Aqua Blast, right? You may have a soul because you have a sense of self, but then again, it's also possible that you don't. And if you don't, even I cannot summon something that doesn't exist. Divine magic is the power that works on what already exists. Likewise, my Argonautai works on an existing soul to strengthen and materialize it. It doesn't have the power to create something from nothing. Hearing Pollux's explanation, Terra bit his lips. He was willing to accept any truth and had vowed to his dear friend to save Luna no matter what the truth might be. But he couldn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. No matter how much he wanted to save her, he couldn't find a way. However, Pollux continued speaking. But I haven't attempted it myself, so I can't say for sure that it's impossible. Then. Reincarnating a demon into a fairy, isn't that interesting? I can't promise that I can definitely do it, but I'll try to find out if there's a way to do so. Thank you. Terra stood up and unconsciously grabbed the hands of Pollux, who was smiling gently. Behind him, Luna showed an unamused expression on her face, but Terra didn't seem to notice. The Fairy Princess collaboration, there was nothing more encouraging than this at the present moment. Of course, since this collaborator was a member of the tyrannical 12 stars, she would turn from collaborator to enemy in an instant if they became hostile to Rapazmafel. Even so, he was happy that she was purely concerned about them at the moment. Can you let go of my hands for the time being? Your cute girlfriend San is already burning with jealousy. When Pollux teased him, Luna hurriedly turned away. Terra quickly tried to explain, but he was probably not accustomed to doing this. Stuttering that, and it's different, he just couldn't get to the point. Looking at their reactions, Pollux laughed lightly. These two people are not villains. Although her master was merciless towards demons, perhaps it was possible to arrange for these two to be spared. As she thought so, she had a good feeling about this. No, if everything was going according to her master's plans, she should currently be more gentle than she was before. Although she didn't know how much of her had returned, it was possible that some gentleness still remained. For the time being, she didn't have any way to save them with her current knowledge. Then, it might be a bit risky, but she had no choice but to search the memories of her true body. Even if she didn't know it, her true body might. However, Pollux's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a heavy pressure that salted her in the next moment. Something was coming inside her very being. An irresistibly strong will was forcibly dominating her. Furthermore, Pollux knew its ident. She was expecting this to happen eventually. But why now of all times? Fairy Princess Dano. Are you run? Take the children, quickly, from Alfheim, but, hurry. Before I'm dominated by the G.O.dis. If I'm no longer myself, I won't be able to hold back next time. Sorry about this. Seeing Pollux shouting desperately, Terra understood that this was not a matter they could deal with right now. Even though he hesitated for a moment, he quickly grabbed Luna's hand and jumped away. He didn't want to abandon Pollux, as doing so was the most shameful misdeed possible to him. However, if Pollux became an enemy and she decided not to hold back, he wouldn't be able to protect Luna. After considering this, he decided to make a quick withdrawal. While watching Terra's back get further away, Pollux gave a sarcastic smile. To think that she would move me, who is a cornerstone for the balance of the world, it seems the G.O.Dis-sama is running out of options. Although this signifies just how well Rapasama's plan is going, I should be pleased, yet I'm having mixed feelings. But this was expected. I've read this flow of events, the timing is really terrible though. Pollux laughed and forced her own soul into dormancy. If the G.O.Dis wanted to use this body, fine, she'd let her have it. But as a price, this would narrow the G.O.Dis vision. Most people didn't know about this, but the G.O.Dis didn't always see everything that was happening in the world. Instead, the opposite was true. Her vision was narrow because it was too broad. For example, suppose there was a model that perfectly mimicked the planet called Midgard. There were towns and people in the model, and they moved in sync with reality. Would one be able to observe the people's activities through it? No, it would be impossible. They would be too small, while the observer was too big. This was the relations.H.I+P between the G.O.Dis and Midgard. She was usually looking at the world with a magnifying GLA.S or microscope to observe a very narrow area. Therefore, she couldn't observe everything. She had to use terminals, avatars, to act as her hands and send dolls to act on her behalf. Because their existences were too different, it was difficult for her to completely grasp all the tiny people. However, it wasn't like there was no solution to this. She could log into her avatars or dolls and observe the world through their eyes. Pollux was not the G.O.Dis avatar, but there was virtually no difference. To be precise, her true body was simply such an existence. Although Pollux was a fairy that had separated from her true body and established her own ego, she could still be forcefully used if the G.O.Dis wanted to do so. Of course, if she wanted to resist, she could do so for tens of minutes, but she didn't do so. This was because even if she resisted now, the result would be the same. Besides, there were merits to not resisting. If the G.O.Dis logged into her, the G.O.Dis perspective would be narrowed to her own perspective. In other words, the G.O.Dis couldn't grasp her master's actions while Pollux was being controlled. This was basically a double-edged sword for the G.O.Dis. While she obtained Pollux's power, Ruppas would be completely free, even if it was only temporarily. The rest is up to Ruppas-sama. I don't think I'll be killed, but the next time I wake up, I should be prepared to have at least lost an arm. Her body surrendered, but her memories did not. Pollux sealed her soul by her own will, preventing the G.O.Dis from being able to read her memories. Even so, she herself was unclear which of her memories were true and which ones were lies. For example, she followed Ruppa's order to give Castor the key to the heavens. But when she thought about it now, was it really the real thing? Because, if it was really in the hands of the Demon King right now, Terra and Luna should have already. Ugh. This was the limit of Pollux's thoughts. Her consciousness was painted white and she had the unpleasant feeling of losing herself. Ruppas-sama, elder brother-san. And the light disappeared from Pollux's eyes. Chapter 120 Master, are you sure Leon should be left as he is? Yes, just let him cool his head for a bit. After binding Leon with chains of arcane power and rendering him helpless, we left him there and departed from the former demi-human village, which had become a scorched plain. The effects of Photon Chain were that it rendered the target immobile for a certain period of time and improved the accuracy of attacks against the target to 100%. This was different from the game in that it was permanent unless the caster cancelled it or the target pulled himself free. In the game, it was pretty much ineffective against boss CLA.S.S enemies. In any event, if it was Leon, he should recover after a while and pull himself free, so there was no problem. Currently, Tanaka and Suzuki were running alongside each other, heading to our next destination Alfheim. We could only leave Leon behind for now. Bringing Leon along now would cause unnecessary trouble, yet killing him would be a waste of his combat power. There was also the option of forcefully making him submit to a master-subordinate relations. H.I+P, but this would reduce his boss status to that of a tamed monster and lower his level from 1000 to 800. Naturally, his exceptional HP of 1,500,000 would be expected to drop sharply. Indeed, after Leon was captured in the game, his HP was 250,000. In addition to being limited to level 800 as a tamed monster, his HP was surprising as it was clearly inferior to that of a boss monster. It couldn't be helped for the sake of game balance, so I couldn't do anything about it. This was one of the most CLA.S.sick features of an RPG. An enemy would have HP in the tens of thousands, yet when it became an ally, its HP would be reduced to only a few thousand. Still, I didn't think it was a great idea, especially since we would be fighting the G.O.Dis in the future. It would be a pity to reduce Leon's combat power. That was why I thought I should let him remain resistant and hostile to me so that he could maintain his status as a level 1000 boss monster. After talking to him for a bit, I realized he was very simple-minded. If he was properly guided, I felt he could be induced to fight the Demon King. So what are you planning to do next? First, we'll go to Alfheim as planned and meet up with Pollux. As for the option to go to Helheim, the plan was to head to Alfheim next and meet up with the fairy princess Pollux, who was the other half of Gemini and was responsible for sealing the wood Ouroboros. This was because the other Ouroboroses were sealed in Muspelheim, which was outside of the humanoids living S.P.A.ce. Going there would mean that we would be stepping into the realm of the demons. It was a place where we would have to go eventually, but I wanted to consolidate my combat power and be properly prepared before venturing there. Even though the demons would be just small fries to us, if they attacked in the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, it would still be difficult to deal with. Based on the fact that Taurus had showed up, the entrance to Helheim was probably nearby, but it didn't make sense to go there now. Firstly, if I wanted to move Taurus, who was responsible for sealing an Ouroboros, I would have to prepare a substitute I.Toot, but none of my current members could do it. There were 3 people who were familiar with seal-type skills, namely Agakeros, Dina, and Sagittarius. Agakeros might actually end up awakening it instead, so he was out of the question. I wasn't sure what Dina could do. Sagittarius just joined us, so it would be a bit weird to swap him out with Taurus so quickly. Therefore, I should recruit Pollux first and let her summon an Einherjar as a substitute. Toot. Besides, Taurus already said, come after everything else is done. This probably meant don't come yet. If I were to casually go there, he might conclude, you are really not Rupas, and start attacking. Furthermore, I don't wanna. I'll never go. Let's just leave it like that. Leave him until the final battle and let him be a character that doesn't appear until the credits roll at the very end. Dina was acting rather spoiled in her refusal to go. If I insisted on going to Helheim, she might run away using X-Gate and not come back, so it was reasonable to postpone the trip. Furthermore, the hero and his companions were currently with us. If we brought them to Helheim, it would be too pitiful for them. At their levels, they would probably die in a battle with some small fry devils there. This was merely based on knowledge of the game, but even the weakest small fry devils in Helheim exceeded level 200. It was one of the most difficult dungeons for beginners. They were some perverted, self-restricting players who charged in with only 2-digit levels, but then N.O.Body was forcing them to do so. The youth SEI and the others only came along because of the issue concerning the demi-humans, but they were not really our companions. In that case, no matter what, I should send them to a nearby city first. Anyway, Pollux In the game, she was always treated as a set with Castor, being the fairy siblings. Thus, I didn't really know their individual combat power. First of all, there was no battle data. The only data available was that of Castor. Pollux would be levitating nearby, neither attacking nor taking damage. She had an accuracy value so she could technically be hit, but even then, Castor would take the damage instead for some reason. Occasionally, she would cast divine magic to support Castor, so she was like an optional accessory for Castor. Her scariest aspect was probably her summoning ability. Surprisingly, unlike other MMOs, there was no summoner CLA.S.S in X-Gate Online, so it was impossible to summon phantom beasts or magical beasts out of nothing. This was probably because the administrators deemed it to be unnecessary since the Monster Tamer and Alchemist CLA.S.SES already covered this role. However, for some reason, only Pollux could do this. Once the battle began, she would summon periodically after a certain amount of time to send reinforcements against the enemy. Well, in any game, one would find things like XX summoned a friend to happen frequently. This could probably be treated as summoning. Even so, it wouldn't summon souls of the dead, such as the Einherjar. Of course, this ability was weakened for some reason when she became an ally. It was no longer a skill that would increase the numbers of one's allies. Instead, it became an attack skill that temporarily summoned a big man in full body armor to make an attack. When I first saw this, it was quite disappointing. Moreover, the summoned hero vanished immediately after Finus.H.I plus NG the attack. Why was it like that, even though it remained behind when it was used by the enemy? Anyway, Castor's true form was currently here, the optional accessory, Pollux, was acting on her own now. Was this really okay? To be honest, she seemed absurdly weak. Dina, is there a suitable village or town on the way to Alfheim? I want to send the hero and his companions there. In that case, Rupasama, how about Lejarn, the warrior city? It has a large population and there are also transports like demi-dragon carriages, so they can resume their journey without any problem. What kind of city is it? In the realm of Leavitian, there are 4 domains, namely the Sword Domain, S.H.I plus Eld Domain, Spear Domain, and Bow Domain. Lejarn can be considered to be the center of the Spear Domain. One of the heroes who followed Aelioth to betray Rupasama became the First Lord. Thereafter, the Lord's.H.I plus P was inherited by his descendants through the generations. If I recall, the Lord of the Spear Domain is of the N.O.Bleespath family. Master, if you give the order, I can wipe it out with Brachium. What do you think? No, thank you. Do you intend to send the hero and his companions to a burning field? After hearing Libra interrupt Dina's explanation, I sighed. Why did she always think in terms of annihilating the other party? Although she had the highest possible AI level of 5, it made me want to cry that she was still a piece of junk. Anyway, It was a domain of Leavitian, huh? It seemed that I had unknowingly returned to where I started. It might be natural since the living s.p.a.ce of the humanoids was small. It seemed that I had gone in a circle already. I departed from Leavitian to Svalin, then onwards to the royal tomb and Gillerhorn. I stopped at Vanaheim and Blutgong. Then, it was on to Dropnir, and I dropped by Mjolnir on the way to Tyrfing. And now, I was back in Leavitian once more. In other words, as far as the humanoids living s.p.a.ce was concerned, I had roughly traveled around in a circle. I thought it was quite fast, but considering the area involved, it was like driving a car around J.A.Pan for a week. It would naturally be fast. So what kind of city is it? Yes. First of all, it has various kinds of facilities. The equipment for warriors and knights are of particularly good quality. Don't you mean bad quality? It must be trash, right? Responding to Dina's words, Scorpius and Libra gave a critical evaluation. Well, it might be true at our levels, but this was the limit of the current world. I couldn't evaluate it since I had not even seen it, but wasn't it possible that there might be some unexpectedly good products? Furthermore, there is an annual martial meeting where warriors can show off their abilities. In accordance with the fantasy trope, it's a great place for the protagonists to test their skills. Would you like to predict.I.P.8? Won't I end up killing the predict.I.P. ants? It had been said many times already that the overall level of this era had been greatly reduced. Even the world's strongest, the Sword Saint himself, was like that. The people who could break through level 100 were exceedingly rare. Currently, we were like people from an RPG that had a level 1000 limit entering a world with a level 99 limit. To begin with, the arena itself was different. Even if I flicked someone's forehead as a joke without any killing intent, it would be enough to send that person's head flying. Of course, I would use blunt edge strike skill during a fight, but if I forgot to activate it, it would become a murder case. I didn't want to risk it. By the way, it might be a bit late to mention it now, but it seemed that the Sword Saint was a tiger. No, I had actually seen him in Dropnir, you know, that tiger. Whenever I saw him, he would run away in fear for some reason. I had no idea that he was the Sword Saint. I thought that he was just a timid big cat. Sorry, Sword Saint. Anyway. What is it, Sagittarius? You've been rather quiet. No. Currently, I don't have the qualifications to join in on the conversation, don't worry about it. It's already over. I spoke to Sagittarius, who was sitting in a corner, and then moved next to him. He didn't change into a humanoid form. Instead, he was sitting there in his large true form, so it was a bit cramped. If you can't forgive yourself no matter what, you can just contribute more during the next battle. I'm looking forward to your archery skills, you know. No, really. Although Libra could also perform as a long-distance sniper, having two snipers was never a problem. Besides, his range was even longer than Libra's and his attack would absolutely hit the target. It could also be used to teleport, so it could be really helpful depending on how it was used. Furthermore, he was someone with valuable common sense. Even that alone made him worth it. Rupa-sama, now, I feel a bit cramped. Could you change into your humanoid form? In his case, changing into a humanoid form merely changed his lower body, since his upper body was already human. But it should still be better than staying as a horse. When I said so, he smiled slightly and nodded. Ah, Rupa-sama, please wait. Karkanos noticed something and rushed to stop it. I didn't understand the reason though. As I watched, the horse-like lower body of Sagittarius glowed and eventually changed into the lower body of a human. Karkanos quickly covered Virgo's eyes and turned her around. What's this guy? So I thought, but in the next moment, I understood the reason. This was because there was a pervert with a naked lower body standing before me. Oh, that's why I said wait. The symbol of manhood was swaying at his crotch. Luckily, Dina instantly activated a water element arcane magic to censor it with a mosaic, so I was able to avoid a direct view. Even so, it was terrible, and huge. The person at the heart of the issue, Sagittarius, didn't seem to care at all. He stood in a dignified manner with no intention of hiding anything. Transformation completed. For some reason, Scorpius' fist sank into Sagittarius' smug-looking face. What are you doing? Are you stupid? Why are you showing Rupa-sama that filthy thing? Cover it up now, or do you want me to cut it off? Even if you say that, I've always been like this. When you are a humanoid, it's different from when you're a horse. Although I was stunned by this development, I somewhat accepted Sagittarius' explanation. I see, so that's how it is. Now that he mentioned it, his lower body was usually naked. As a centaur, he wore a robe on his upper body, but his lower body was a horse without wearing anything. As I recalled, when Ares first changed into humanoid form, he was naked as well. Dina had to dress him up right away. Agacaros, Scorpius, Karkinos, and Leon must actually be decent beings. At least, they prepared their own clothes. However, Sagittarius was half humanoid, so it might be common sense for him to wear something on top but nothing on the bottom. Don't worry. I don't mind. I mind, you fool. When Sagittarius replied with an indifferent tone, Scorpius' angry kick exploded on his crotch. Sagittarius grabbed his crotch and squatted down, while Scorpius looked down at him as if she was looking at something filthy. What is this? Stop it. It must have hurt. Still, I didn't expect Sagittarius to be a lower body only nudist. I thought we finally had a serious person join us, but it turned out to be a weirdo again. What was wrong with the 12 stars? For the time being, should I trans.m.u.te some underwear?